Welcome back. It's time now for The Clash. So we've heard in recent days that Boris Johnson is apparently dead set against more lockdowns, and he certainly said the right things to an extent in his COVID briefing this afternoon.
When you've got a large proportion of the country, as we have now, with immunity, then smaller changes can make a bigger difference and give us the confidence that we don't need to go back to the lockdowns of the past.
But then we got the big but, his plan B, involving a return to restrictions we thought we'd seen the back of on Freedom Day. And that's on the table, which I think should be a big cause of concern. So does Boris Johnson need to go harder and rule out a return to lockdown for good? To debate this tonight, I have Labour MP Peter Dowd, who signed an early day motion for a zero COVID strategy. Matthew Lesh, the head of research at the Adam Smith Institute. Laura Dodsworth, the writer, author, filmmaker, and the woman behind the best-selling book, State of Fear. And Sally Jane Cutler, professor in medical microbiology at the University of East London. So, Matthew Lesh, Boris Johnson has come up with a toolbox which I believe you support, but he hasn't actually ruled out lockdowns. Why?
Look, I think, Dan, lockdowns made a lot of sense last year in the context of a new virus, in the context of something that could have seriously overwhelmed our hospitals and resulted in a huge number of deaths. But now we have vaccinations. I think you're right to criticise Boris for not completely and totally ruling out a future lockdown. I think if we have a future lockdown, it'll be man-made. It'll be a result of our state failing to ensure we have booster shots, failing to ensure the vulnerable are vaccinated, failing to deliver good treatments that are now emerging against COVID, a failure to build the societal resilience we now need. I think we have to live in a world where we're free to go along with our daily lives without thinking, as I hear from people all the time when speaking to them, that we're about to get locked down again. There is real fear in the community about this, and I think it absolutely does need to be ruled out. We don't want to live in this dystopian world where the government locks us in our homes every once in a while on a whim, and something like the NHS will be used as a justification. Well, the NHS exists to protect us. We don't exist to protect the NHS.
Sally Jane Cutler, isn't that the point? We thought now that we were a vaccinated population with 93% of adults with COVID antibodies, that lockdowns would be off the table. And if you saw the press conference today, they're anything but.
Well, my opinion is that really lockdowns are probably the most effective way of actually having that major impact on the case numbers that are going into hospital and people that are sadly losing their lives. We know that lockdowns are highly effective at doing that, but they come at a big, big price. And so it's kind of like that last resort. So really, sort of, it's not being ruled out, because what if a new variant came through that was a total breakout?
There's so many what ifs, aren't there, Laura Dodsworth? What if the Black Plague came back? But right now, the vaccinations work, and yet we're still ruling out
lockdown. We don't need it. Yes, but it's kind of like our emergency get-out-of-jail-free card.
Well, it's interesting that Sally just said it's like an emergency get-out-of-jail-free card. I don't know if there's actually any intention to use them, but it feels like they're being hung like a sword of Damocles over people's heads to maybe encourage compliance with these plans A, B, which aren't really specified or quantified. Look, lockdowns were implemented under emergency regulations. We are not in an emergency anymore. We are 18 months into an epidemic. We have more knowledge about the virus. We have vaccines, we have early treatment. Ministers have confirmed that the infection fatality rate of COVID is 0.096. So while a lot of people have died, that is now comparable to a very bad flu, but we don't lock down for a very bad flu. It's not proportionate. And there are other reasons why we should not lock down. I'm afraid, unlike Matthew Lesh, I don't agree that lockdown was ever proportionate, and there are a number of reasons why. It can't be stressed enough that the World Health Organization and the UK have never included mass quarantining of healthy people, lockdowns, in an epidemic or in any pandemic preparedness planning. Lockdowns don't work. They create collateral damage in terms of health, mental health, the economy, people's businesses, losing jobs. Lockdowns actually cause deaths, which is something that is well known to pandemic planners and death planners. The government has obstinately refused to produce a cost-benefit analysis of lockdowns 18 months into the epidemic, which I think tells you a lot. There's a wider issue of morality to consider. Is it moral to confine people to their homes, leaving them unable to go out and earn a living, which was true for millions of people during the lockdowns? Not everybody was on furlough or able to work from home. I think if lockdown is implemented again, people will be less likely to obey the rules. I heard you just now, Dan, saying that you'll follow the law, but you won't want to follow guidance. I think there'll be more people who don't follow guidance and also break the law. And this breaks our trust and our social contract with government. And finally, coming off the back of my research for my book, The State of Fear, people were encouraged, coaxed and coerced into following the previous lockdowns with a suite of behavioural science measures, including the weaponisation of fear. Children were intimidated with slogans like "Don't kill Granny." I don't want to go back to emotionally blackmailing and coercing the populations following lockdown.
We're there again today, which is so disturbing. Look, that a zero COVID strategy is a delusional pipe dream that would keep us in the same sort of COVID prison that Australia, New Zealand, Singapore and China now find themselves in.
Right, let's start from the position nobody asked for this pandemic. It isn't a conspiracy, okay? Nobody asked for 26,000 people to be...
We agree on that.
Nobody
we agree
asked,
on that.
No, let me finish. No, let me
I said
finish.
we agree
nobody
on that.
For 185 deaths. Yesterday. Nobody asked for 134,000 deaths from last year. Nobody's asked for 8,500 people to be in a hospital. So let's get real about this. And the issue about the no COVID, the zero COVID, was at the beginning of the year, and the 22nd of February, and the government came up with their roadmap. We were saying at that time, you had to take a position that stopped people dying. It wasn't for the fun of it. It wasn't because I'm some control freak or I want some ridiculous dystopian present as opposed to dystopian future. Let's get real about that one. And let me finish up, make 2 or 3 points on this, and it's important. This was all predicated on there being a successful rollout of the vaccine, that the vaccine was successful in keeping hospital admissions low and deaths of people who've been vaccinated low. It was also about the infection rate not putting the NHS under unsustainable pressure. And the final one was that the risk assessment was not being significantly altered by new variants. That was the plan then. And effectively, or the criteria, and effectively, it's still trying to keep those type of assessments in mind. Now, if that means that it has to be a lockdown in the future, okay, do I want a lockdown? Of course I don't want a lockdown. We've all been affected by it. But let's keep it in some sort of proportion.
Peter Dowd, you don't suggest that we should try and stamp out, wipe out, eliminate the winter flu, yet the infection fatality rate of COVID is now 0.096%, as Laura Dodsworth pointed out. That's the same as the flu. So why are we turning our lives upside down for COVID when we don't do that for the flu in a highly vaccinated population? I mean, way more people are vaccinated in the UK against COVID than they ever have been for the flu.
Yeah, look, let's try and get this into some sort of context. 136,000 people don't die of the flu every year. This is a challenge. It is a pandemic. It's a worldwide pandemic. And what we have to have in our armoury, because there was one point this was talked about it being a war. At one point we said, we need an armoury. We need a variety of ways of challenging and dealing with this. And so you have to keep on the table as many weapons, as much as your armoury as you possibly can. It doesn't mean to say you're going to get them all out.
Surely the best way to deal with it is a highly vaccinated population and natural immunity as well. And Matthew Leach, we now have that, over 90%. So what more can we do?
Yeah, this lockdown debate feels very 2020 to me. We're in a completely different context now. We don't actually need lockdowns to be in the armoury. We don't need them as an option because we have vaccines. If there's a new variant, we can update the vaccines. We should be asking the government what are the processes to ensure that we have procured vaccine updates that are able to respond to mutations. How quickly can we go through the regulatory process, and how quickly can we distribute them and ensure people are protected? We now have the technology where we actually don't need lockdowns anymore. It's absurd to talk about lockdowns We have to, because they are extremely costly. We know that they're costly in so many ways to our quality of life. They are such a ridiculous concept to begin with. They're not something that we should use regularly whatsoever.
So let me ask Peter Dowd and Sally Jane Cutler. I just want to know, what level do we have to lock down? I mean, do you accept that very sadly there will be a number of deaths, largely amongst the very old, the very sick, just like there is every year from flu? Do you accept that? Or do you say that there's no acceptable number of deaths and that we should be locked down now? Peter Dowd and Sally Jane Cutler. Peter, start with you.
OK, look, I can remember people last year saying we didn't need the lockdown, we didn't need masks, we didn't need PPE, we didn't need this, we didn't need that.
I don't think anyone said we didn't need PPE.
Oh, yes, they did. Look, I have them in my constituency letterbox, so don't tell me what I did and didn't have done. Come on, I did.
Well,
I remember
name me one person. Name me one person who said we didn't need PPE. That's a ridiculous thing to say.
There were lots of people. Well, there were lots of people saying that, or they were making it up, and I was getting these fictitious emails. Look, and people challenging me on this. Look, at the end of the day, I don't want a lockdown. But we had different levels of lockdown, different countries.
OK, so when do we lock down? That's what I'm asking you. What is the level? What is the acceptable number of deaths for you before we lock down?
Well, look, I see experts. I think they're wonderful experts because I go to experts when I go to see a lawyer, or I go to see my doctor, or I go to see an oncologist. I will take the advice that they give me and weigh everything in the balance. That's all I'm trying to do. It's as simple as that.
But it's a political decision, Peter Dowd. With all due respect, it's a political decision. What is an acceptable number of deaths for you before you lock the country down again? That's a fair question. That's the question the Prime Minister is having to deal with. So you're an MP, you want to be Prime Minister. What's the number?
Of course, no, I don't want to be Prime Minister. Of course he's what having to. This is always something in the NHS and the health field. Is what are the level of what is this level? What is that level? What you're trying to do is to reduce them to the minimum you possibly can. Now, it's impossible to know the figure should be 500 or 1,000. Well, go and speak to the family of the 1,000 people who you're quite happy to see dead as a result of this process.
Dare, Peter. Don't you dare. I've had relatives die of COVID. I've had relatives die of COVID in a care home. So don't you dare say that to me, Peter. But at the same time, don't say it to me because it's disgusting. It's a despicable thing to say. None of us want people to die of COVID. But we also need to accept that people die from lockdowns. They die. They die because of a disease, basically. They die from a disease. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We're getting it under control, and you've just got to maintain an armoury and variations and options available. Sally Jane Cutler, at what level, you say you don't want to rule out lockdowns, at what level for you, what level of deaths for you do we need to lock down again?
I think really it's not just the level of deaths. What you need to look at is the scientific evidence, the situation. If, for instance, we get a vaccine breakthrough variant that is rapidly accelerating through the population.
We don't have that in the no sign.
We don't have that, but we know it can change. And so if that's
dealing with the current scenario, though, the current scenario is that we probably won't need a lockdown because of the good uptake of the vaccine and the protection that we have in the population. But we know that this virus changes quite rapidly. At the moment, we've got a situation when you've got a lot of people that are sort of partially immune because they haven't quite finished all their vaccination. So you've also got a lot of community transmission. So this is actually a recipe to actually help encourage a breakout variant to emerge. I understand that. I understand that.
If it does happen,
final word to you.
That's when we need to put on the brakes as quickly as we can.
But there's no evidence that's going to happen at this point. There's no evidence that's going to happen at this point. Laura Dodsworth, final word to you.
Thank you. I'd just like to say that after a year of global lockdowns, the idea that without them hundreds of thousands more would die has become accepted as truth in a way that's similar to religious dogma. And actually, there are dozens of studies and empirical evidence from around the world that shows that lockdowns don't work. Here in the UK, infections were in retreat before every lockdown. That's fact that anybody can check. I mean, just recently in August, hospital admissions peaked and declined without a lockdown. Lockdowns are one intervention that haven't been proven to be very successful. And I have to challenge the idea that lockdowns don't cause death. I interviewed one of the UK's foremost disaster and recovery planners from my book State of Fear, and she told me that in terms of death and mortuary capacity planning, she would envisage 4 deaths from 2 to 5 years, over 2 to 5 years, caused by lockdown for every 1 COVID death. And that would be from causes such as delayed and missed oncology treatments, sepsis, obstetrics, domestic violence and suicide, from multiple causes. So it's not true to say that lockdowns don't cause death. And at the moment, deaths at home, excess deaths at home are still worryingly high.
Yeah, of course. And what a fascinating debate. Thank you so much for being here, all of you. That was Laura Dodsworth, the author of State of Fear, the head of research at the Adam Smith Institute, Matthew Lesh, the professor of medical microbiology at the University of East London, Sally Jane Cutler, and the Labour MP, Peter Dowd. We'll speak to you all very soon.